This episode of Vision Pros is sponsored by Agenda. Learn more at www.agenda.com.
Welcome to Vision Pros, the show all about spatial computing, visionOS, and getting work done on the Apple Vision Pro. I'm Tim Chatton, host of the show.
You could imagine another new construct in the operating system. So like imagine you're resizing a rectangle and it's purple and it's glowing. It's kind of got some like neon look, and it's almost like you're creating a portal, right? And this portal can be owned by an app. It can be an app window. And what you're doing is you are giving express consent that the app can see anything through that portal window. And it's like a hot fire neon sort of thing. So it's like when it's on, you know, like it's like your screen recording, right? Like it's like got a thing on it. Now I'm drag dropping that, open it up, and I'm dragging it over position so that it's in front of my book, and I'm reading my book. And that means like what I've communicated to the system through my pinchy pinches is it is okay for Justin's translation app to watch me read this book.
Welcome back to another episode of Vision Pros. Joining the podcast today is Justin Searls, whose work you can find at justin.searls.co and on his podcast, Breaking Change. In this episode, we dive into his experiences with the Xreal Glasses and how that compares to the Apple Vision Pro experience, how the Mac integration in visionOS may actually long-term hamper the Apple Vision Pro as a platform, the new APIs in visionOS 2 that enable camera access for enterprises, traveling with the Apple Vision Pro, and much more. My thanks to Agenda 19 for sponsoring this episode of Vision Pros. Download Agenda today for free from the App Store. Learn more at www.agenda.com. I'll be sharing more about Agenda a bit later on in this episode. If you want to support this podcast, go out and try Agenda. It is the app I use to organize and prepare for all of my podcast interviews. Early access to both Vision Pros and iPad Pros is available by subscribing in Apple Podcasts or by supporting the Patreon at www.visionpros.fm/Patreon. My thanks to everyone that supports the show. With that, here's my interview with Justin. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Justin.
Hello. Hey, thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely. So I came across your work through blog posts that got shared on Mastodon about, the value proposition of Apple Vision Pro, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But before we get all that, I'm just curious, how you're finding the Apple Vision Pro. Like, how has it entered your life for the kind of work you do, and what is that work as well?
Yeah, how did it enter my life? Well, when a man loves a woman very much, or like I'm imagining like a stork flying through a window or something on February 2nd.
Yeah.
I actually, my wife and I both pre-ordered it, separately.
Yeah.
So we were like all set up at pre-order time, assuming like this is going to be a hot product. This is going to be sold out in 5 seconds
Yes.
possibly. And, a lot of the rumors going in were that there was going to be like limited supply. I knew that I wanted one for several reasons. One, I've always been, my parents took me to Epcot in like 1992, and there was some sort of virtual reality demo. I think you go in the Sistine Chapel or something. And that's when I realized like, whoa, like, I am inside a thing. My brain has been fooled. I see like the stereoscopic imagery. I can move around and whatnot. And not to say I got the bug in that one moment and spent all of the 90s playing with prototype VR stuff. Like, it was really once the Oculus Rift DK2 came out, the developer kit 2 from, Oculus and Palmer Luckey and all that. Like, I was following that because I'm into gaming. So I owned probably half a dozen headsets of the premium gaming VR headsets through the 2010s. I think I had the most recently a Valve Index and a Quest 2. Okay. And unfortunately, just the market being what it is, and this demand curve now is starting to feel kind of familiar. The people who wanted that bought it right away, and there wasn't enough software in the pipeline for like investors and for game publishers to keep producing AAA, VR games to such a small audience. And so as a result, I kind of fell off and haven't really played very many VR games for the last couple of years. I think the last one I'd sunk like more than 50 hours into was No Man's Sky. And,
yes. Yeah.
And the dream, right? The dream would be, boy, I wish I just had like an Apple ecosystem headset. I wish I had a way to, all in a perfect world, you'd be able to like play real games directly on it. Or
Yeah, it's like, 'cause Apple with gaming, I'm starting to get more into their gaming stuff with their, later chips. I can run Death Stranding, and that's actually a really good port. I've been enjoying that. I played it on PS5, and it seems pretty comparable experience on my iPhone and my iPad. But with gaming on virtual reality, they don't quite understand it. I have my PSVR 2 for when I want to actually do real gaming, and you could actually hook up like racing rigs to the PlayStation, which you can't hook up any wired like things.
Right.
Which that'd be great to hook up like a full racing rig to Apple Vision Pro. There's no USB port to do that. So
well, and honestly, like something so a setup that worked great for me 2022 2023 was the Quest Link. So that can be USB, but it's also wireless, where like you can wear a Meta Quest 2 or a Meta Quest 3 and then wirelessly just over like Wi-Fi 6 talk to your gaming PC a few feet away. And it's surprisingly good. It's
okay. So and you could have the racing rig hooked up to your PC, and that would be responsive enough. That's cool.
And so that was my setup, and that's what I was dreaming of with Vision Pro. And in the past, the only thing that Apple had ever said about VR was in partnership with Valve, demoing like a Steam integration on stage. And I was like, man, it would be really great if they could figure this out. So anyway, that was like one half of my brain coming from Vision Pro. The other half was my brother had encouraged me to buy a couple of Xreal 2 glasses last fall. These are like, 1080p postage stamp size screens with a light shield kind of in front of them. They look like ugly sunglasses, like the bulky enough sunglasses that people think you got pretty severe vision problems if you wear them in public. But there's no battery. It's just, like it's a USB wire from like the left frame or left stem into like a computer.
Okay.
And so when I go to, because I have bad neck and back pain or I have in the course of my life, and so you go to a restaurant or you go to a bar, and I could just work there without like a neutral head position with no one seeing my screen would be off, and that was a great way to work. So in combination of like, man, if I could, like my ideal would be I can stream games and I can get my work done on 4K displays that are more immersive.
Right.
Rather than 1080p. So that's where my headspace was prior to receiving a Vision Pro.
Okay. Yeah, and the whole ergonomic situation with laptops is they're kind of terrible on your lap bending down.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a more elegant experience just like putting the display where it's more ergonomically sound to do so, and it's much bigger, obviously, in Apple Vision Pro.
Honestly, like, you putting it that way, laptops are a compromised product in either situation. If it's on your lap, you're craning your neck, and if it's on a desk, then you've got one of those hilarious, risers that hold it up to kind of get it a headlight. But like then the laptop keyboard is at a 70-degree angle or something.
Yeah.
So you need peripherals to make a laptop make sense at the desk. I think it makes fair sense. You also need them for it to make sense, like mobily. And so I just think it's a product that so many people really, really love because it's their one computer, and they've known it for so long that that's the way that they think, that the only way they can imagine a computer to be. But I'm personally a skeptic that the laptop is going to be a dominant form factor for 15 years from now, 20 years from now.
Sure. Yeah, because that form factor could change with the glasses that are more comfortable to wear and kind of a different. Like, I made a headless MacBook Air because I think that's the best form factor out there.
Sure.
Others may disagree, but it's been fun today. I was using 2 iPads, on a table in front of me with the same input device going between the 2 computers, and it felt like a pretty cohesive experience. And I use an Apple Vision Pro a lot. And it's just like such a modularity is kind of what I love about computing, and Apple Vision Pro is a part of that for sure now.
Yeah, right on.
So the Xreal Glasses, tell me about that experience before we dive into Apple Vision Pro.
Well, they're cheap, right? It's maybe, I think, $399 or something.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that they're all 1080p across the board.
Yeah, with 1080p, I often find myself putting Mac Virtual Display in 1080p because it's a little bit bigger and more comfortable to use. Like, I don't know if you find yourself in the more spread out resolution, the what was it? What's the bigger resolution in Apple Vision Pro you can set it to?
Well, the 4K is like the largest logical resolution, I guess it'll go to.
Yeah, I have better display tool, and I can put in this mode where everything's like itty bitty, which is just comical.
Yeah, and when I say logical, I mean even with that, it's like from a hardware perspective, it'll report that it's like 4Ks of pixels.
Yes,
but people who've inspected, what's actually happening over the wire is it's a compressed, not a full 2160p. It's like 1440 or some other resolution, and then they're doing nearest neighbor or some sort of upscaling.
Yeah,
on top of compression.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But after that, like because macOS supports the kind of like if you're on one of the modern laptops, it'll like more space, less space,
Yes.
like that sort of slider. Everything's all like logical point system now. But to your point, I have to crank it down a little bit to make things look a little bit larger because it's like you're controlling a computer on a TV screen, right? Like like the little traffic signal icons are way too small otherwise.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This we'll talk about later. I'm looking forward to that ultra wide mode where I can have stuff in a little bigger state, but more stuff so I can spread things out, surrounding me more, which will be nice.
For sure.
So hopefully they'll allow for ultra wide where you're able to have that plus the resolution be a bit. Now, I'd love ultra wide as a 1080p monitor almost. Like, I'm not sure if they'll allow that mode or not. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think. Well, we can save that for later. But suffice to say, the Xreal Glasses, being just 1080p, being pretty cheap, I can wear them in public and I'm not super embarrassed, and it's not going to start a whole bunch of conversations with people necessarily. You can throw them in your bag and you're not super worried about scuffing them. So there's something really nice about that form factor. And if you just were to snap your fingers and give me like a 4K version of those, I'm not sure that I wouldn't wear those more.
Yeah.
Maybe not at home, but like right now I'm sort of in this frustrating area where I'm so comfortable in my little battle station that I've created with a Vision Pro and a MacBook Air that I work on, that I used to leave the house and work all over town. And lately, last few months, I've really... In fact, my hair is back to brown. I live in like Central Florida. And we get so much sunshine that like typically I'm out so much that my hair gets sun bleached immediately. This is the first time my hair has been brown in 4 years, and I think it's just because I'm staying inside so much. So I don't love that, right?
Yeah.
But like when I go out, I feel like, well, if I'm just using my laptop, it's a compromised experience. Or if I've just got these 1080p things, it feels silly because I know the Vision Pro is so much better.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the display quality, not nearly as good. It can be 1080p.
Not Retina.
Yeah, like the 1080p mode in Apple Vision Pro, it still feels like the text is pretty crisp to my eye, at least.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Yeah, it feels very pixelated. You're definitely in a one window at a time kind of operating environment, right? Where maybe I got a full screen terminal or a full screen word processor, but that's it.
So you're a man with multiple Macs, I believe, right? You got your MacBook Air and you have a Mac Studio, is that right?
Yeah, and I'm also like all in on all of Apple's ecosystem. So all of my files are in iCloud Drive, and I'm living the dream that they market. But it also means I ride with like every single bug. That makes it difficult to juggle multiple machines. So yeah, I've got an M2 Ultra Mac Studio in front of me here, and that's what I'm speaking to you with right now. And an M3 MacBook Air. And I bought the M2 Ultra for development because it's a real beefy, really powerful computer, and yet here I am 7 feet away using the M3 MacBook Air, in part because the experience of doing the Mac Virtual Desktop or Mac Virtual Display on the Vision Pro is, in my opinion, super nice when you're using a MacBook, and it's somewhat less nice when you're remoting into a desktop. Just because
the input, right?
Yeah, the ergonomics of the keyboard and the trackpad, and knowing that they're all wired and they come as a package deal with the display is super great. But when I actually bought one of those. 12 South makes a thing where you can put a Magic Keyboard next to a trackpad. So I bought an extra. God, it was like a $300 investment once you get all the accessories. And I tried it, I assumed that's how I was going to do this. I would connect to the Mac Studio with the Vision Pro, and I'd use that sort of like lap bar, even though it's a little bit unwieldy.
Yeah.
But in practice, the input cuts out so frequently that it would just be a showstopper. Say, oh, input not working, and I still get this when I'm using Mac Virtual Display on my network for 10 seconds. 40 seconds, and when you're in flow and you're trying to get stuff done, that's just not acceptable. And so, like, I don't care how fast the computer is if it's stopping all the time.
Interesting. Yeah, I bought the little tray thing where it kind of mimics the laptop form factor with the trackpad below it, and it was okay. Nice. But, like, you get some external input with the trackpad. The other bummer is none of Apple's keyboards have a backlight, which on the Vision Pro, that the typeface on that's kind of faded, and with the pass-through camera, it's kind of hard to see, even in the daytime, what the actual keys are, you know.
Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, so the backlight is just such a major improvement of quality of life, just even the daytime use of that keyboard.
Have you considered glow-in-the-dark stickers? That might help.
Right, that might be a thing. Yeah, but yeah, that's it's like, oh, the laptop input is the best input for Vision Pro, and I wish they just made this laptop input as a standalone accessory for Mac desktops even. Like, just take out the computer part, turn that into, like, a single thing you can connect to things.
You know, I think it was Syracuse on ATP a few weeks ago. He was opining, like, it would be nice if Apple... maybe I'm giving Syracuse a credit for something somebody else said. I don't know. Somebody in the greater Apple podcast ecosystem, I know it was coming through my earballs, was saying it would be really nice to have a single keyboard trackpad device that was totally agnostic. Yeah, it was in the lead up to the iPad Pro, right? Like, hey, the Magic Keyboard thing is nice and the cantilever or whatever, but, like, wouldn't it be great if we could just pair a single keyboard trackpad thing with all of these devices across the entire, you know, ecosystem of Apple products, and maybe have some sort of attachment mechanism for the things that you might need to dangle off of it.
Yeah.
And so then that way we don't have 15, 20 keyboards floating around. And that's how I feel. And I find it's really frustrating, even with the seamless pairing, to know, like, oh, well, this trackpad's over here, or, oh, I've got a trackpad in my bag and it's currently depressed, and that's why I can't click anything on this Mac downstairs. Like, it's a frustrating current state of affairs, I think, for input across the board.
Yeah, like, they have continuity. It's like, do that with the keyboard. Like, and it's so frustrating that you can't just, like, pairing the trackpad, and, like, it's supposed to just all work, and it does if you plug it in with a wire, and then you know for sure it's connected to that one. But
sure.
I think the other day I was accidentally inputting on my wife's MacBook, like, a floor below me, because I didn't realize at the time, because there's no. Yeah, it's kind of, they're designed. It feels like they're designed for one computer at a time, and you should buy a second one if you want to use it with another computer.
I don't suspect this is some sort of, like, malicious thing.
No.
Conspiracy for Apple to sell more keyboards. What I think it is that they clearly organize their teams around hardware product releases. Like, and so somebody's working on the iPad and they're designing the iPad keyboard. They're not thinking about the iMac, and the iMac only gets thought about every 3 years or whatever.
Right.
And so when it's time to think about the iMac, then you might have exactly this idea, but you're like, well, we're not going to be updating the iPad thing for, like, another 18 months. So there's just never going to be that moment in time where it's like, let's think about keyboards across the board, because they're thought about in this staggered way, platform by platform by platform. And that's where I think the way that Apple's currently organized is super successful in a lot of ways, but it can miss the forest for the trees sometimes, especially when it comes to accessories.
Yeah, the headless MacBook Air that I built for $300 is because I bought a Mac on eBay with broken screen for $300, so that was the.
Whoa, okay, so this was too expensive. This was like when you mentioned that you had that, I was like, I couldn't take my beautiful
your beautiful one,
Air, right, and behead it and then decimate its value. So you took a broken one.
Yeah, eBay is littered full of these MacBook Airs with broken screens, and
I'm writing a note.
It's an expensive repair, so the value is dramatically less, I must say. So. Yeah,
if you buy one for $200, $300 and then you screw up the mod, you're not going to be too sore about it.
That too. It's an easy mod to do.
Go back on eBay and sell it for another $200.
Right. Yeah, but you just need to find, like, a good condition bottom half, and the top half can be whatever. And so and it's like the keyboard that Apple should have made, 'cause it like connects to iPad right away with Universal Control, Apple Vision Pro, Mac Visual Display. It's a brilliant thing, and you can hook up through a wire to just an external display. There you've got a little Mac Mini kind of replacement. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I love it.
So yeah, Apple should sell this. If they did, it'd be like $500 though, probably, to replace the Mac Mini. But yeah, this would be an interesting project as like a Mac Mini replacement. Just Apple sell a headless, little slab.
Well, I'm old enough to have gone to a computer lab with a bunch of Apple IIs as a elementary school student, and I that was my first imagination. I remember I tried to get DALL-E to like generate me an image back in January of like the thing that I want is an Apple II, but with the modern design aesthetic and unibody aluminum enclosure.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Of like it's a keyboard, but there's a computer in it, and that's such a far gone concept that none of the trading data. Midjourney failed at it too. I was like, bummer. I'm gonna just have to build this myself.
Yeah, the only thing it's missing is, I'm not sure if you've seen that new keyboard, I think from Logitech, that's designed for like iPads on the go as a standalone keyboard that has a little cover when not in use. I'd love if that, this thing had some sort of cover so I'm not smashing the keys in my bag and the Mac gets a little grumpy. Because the Mac can get a little grumpy with that, and the Mac can also turn on by hitting one of the keys. So I need like a little cover designed for this thing. But otherwise, it's brilliant.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give that a try. Not that I need another project.
Right, yes. I will say it's
exciting.
It's a very fun form factor because you've probably experienced using the Apple Vision Pro with the laptop. It feels just kind of weird having the screen there that you're not using. Like,
it's like a vestigial organ. It just kind of pokes up at you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So before we get further into stuff, I'm curious what your actual work is. I know you do some development. Like, what can you share a bit on your actual workload and what you do?
Yeah, so 13 years ago, I co-founded a software agency called Test Double, and we're a consulting company. We work with a lot of engineering firms, or excuse me, I should say like engineering organizations that help build software at companies of all kinds, large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies where software is their main product, and then companies like, Hendrick Automotive, which is a gigantic chain of car dealerships. We work primarily by like just hiring really great senior developers, primarily web, back-end technologies, as well as like front-end JavaScript stuff, because that's most of what businesses and enterprises need. And for a long time, I was primary sales guy. Once the company got big enough that it needed people to, take sales meetings and, manage client issues and so forth, that consumed most of my time. But over the last few years, we've finally been able to hire people who are like, not only like want to do sales, but are good at it, or same with account management or managing people. And so speaking of vestigial organs, I've the agency functions really successfully without me, being in that sort of mission critical path anymore. So right now, what that frees me up to do is a lot of what I love, like blogging and podcasting and share and like interfacing with the public, which is always the natural thing that I love doing. It's kind of what got me into starting a company in the first place. And so I've been slowly building out my justin.searls.co blog as a, it's a blog, but I want to kind of revitalize the idea of having like multimedia in one website, whereas every platform right now is kind of defined by what sort of media people expect to have, whether it's like, scrolling through videos or selecting videos that are widescreen or listening to audio and so instead I've got all these media types there, and I'm experimenting with now making videos. I've got my own podcast called Breaking Change. That's just a solo podcast. That's, me talking like this, I guess, but in 3-hour chunks, that comes out every couple weeks. I write long form blog posts. I've got a newsletter going. And so a lot of my time is spent figuring out how in my next phase of life do I find the most success and the most joy communicating publicly, especially in a post-Twitter world where it's really hard to get kind of organic or viral or reach. I'm more talking to like, people who see the world the way I do and have opted into subscribing.
Yes. Yeah.
The other thing I do right now is, I do a lot of open source in the Ruby community. So I maintain the standard Ruby like linter and formatter. And so I'm very often, I'm speaking at Rails World this fall. I just got back from Ruby Kaigi in Japan, and I'm building a Ruby on Rails app for my wife to help run her business, which is sells strength training programs each month.
Okay.
And so it's going to be kind of like a Fitbot or like, a self-service place where you'll sign up and then you'll get a new program each month and a, app-like experience that'll walk you through the workouts with you.
Nice.
So I've got a lot of little irons in various fires, I suppose.
Very cool. And Ruby development, that's in Xcode, or is there a different app you tend to use with that?
So the Ruby community is interesting because it is from 2004. Everyone I know who was into Ruby back then, we all just decided one day that the Mac was the best platform. And if you looked at any of the other open source languages, it was either just straight up Linux or Windows. And I think that the Ruby community, probably in part because DHH was loud and proud about, hey, like, I love the Mac, and at the time, TextMate, this older, Mac-focused editor. We all just, like, drank the Kool-Aid, I guess, and got on board really early. So the Ruby community is, like, simultaneously, like, an incredibly Mac-forward group of developers, but the Apple development toolchain ecosystem has never been interested at all in anything that Ruby developers would need.
Right.
So like, like Mac ships with Ruby, but I think it still ships with like 2.6, like an ancient, long since end of life version. And the only thing, like, Apple's, signaled they're not going to update it again because that stuff's considered deprecated from, like, Apple is no longer shipping, or they want to be out of the business of shipping old Ruby and old Python and stuff built in with every Mac that comes.
Okay.
But Homebrew, for example, if you use Homebrew on the Mac, that's maintained, led by Mike McQuaid, who's a friend of mine, and he's a Rubyist, and Homebrew was written in Ruby originally. And so I think there's a lot of common cause and shared heritage in the maybe the liminal space between developers using Macs and developers building Apple stuff with Macs.
Gotcha. TextMate, is that still an active development app, or what do you use these days?
I haven't used TextMate for probably since like 2008. The creator shipped a TextMate 2, and I remember, there was the predictable amount of grousing about how it didn't do everything TextMate 1 did, and I'm not sure it's been getting updates for a while. So I don't really think anyone seriously uses it. What was the case for most of the 2010s is most open source, most web developers that I knew who were using Macs, a lot of them were doing Vim and Emacs in the terminal. I was a terminal Vim user for a long time.
Okay.
And then recently, like probably the last 2.5 years, VS Code has finally become, Visual Studio Code for Microsoft has finally become robust enough and with so many features that it makes it hard to put down, included like an integrated terminal environment that can run all your bits and bobs for you. So I've been in VS Code for a long time, and when I talk to other developers, it seems like if you're not using a terminal editor, you're probably using VS Code.
And that's on the Mac, Microsoft.
Yep.
Amazing.
It's an Electron app. Interestingly enough, it started life in a way with Atom, which was a development, like an editor created at GitHub, which is also a Ruby company. And Atom was originally like kind of Mac only.
Yeah.
So that's where, the Electron project came out of the Atom project, and then VS Code was built on Electron. And then Microsoft bought GitHub and closed down Atom and to, focus on just VS Code. So there's, even though it's a Microsoft product, even that has ties back to the Ruby community ultimately and the Mac ecosystem.
Interesting. So throughout this episode, we will scatter in some visionOS 2 stuff. And one thing I just wanted to just bring up is the AirPlay receiver mode in Apple Vision Pro now with 2. And I've been testing that with the iPad, which is really fun because the iPad has its own input with keyboard and trackpad. And that trackpad actually comes through in the visionOS environment. So you can fully use iPad apps if you have like a keyboard and trackpad hooked up to it in a pretty nifty way. Like the audio comes through as well. And
interesting.
So
it's just like you're using Mac Virtual.
Exactly.
Or Mac,
yeah.
Except it's the iPad just has to initiate it and say, hey, I want to beam into the Vision Pro.
Exactly. The only difference is you can't share the input from the iPad over to the Apple Vision Pro, which you can on the Mac.
Ah, right. There's not like a continuity.
But otherwise, yeah, if you're doing a focused iPad thing, if there's like, so I sideloaded Ferrite onto my visionOS, but if that wasn't possible, I could now just use the iPad in the visionOS environment and have a good experience with that.
That's brilliant. Oh, what a great idea. I didn't. I might have seen the bento box little icon that said, "Hey, it's a Vision Pro receiver, or excuse me, an AirPlay 2 receiver now."
Yeah.
But I never think to use that feature on a Mac, so
Right.
it never would have occurred to me to actually use it on Vision Pro. But it makes total sense, right? Because looking at an iPad through pass-through is not a great experience.
No, it is not. Yeah. Would you ever have a use of this, you think?
Well, I having just heard of its existence, the only thing that comes to mind immediately is I think the biggest drawback of Mac Virtual Display on Vision Pro is that you don't get audio piped. If I could pipe just music, I don't know, you tell me if you know whether this is possible or not, from my Mac into the Vision Pro, that would be lovely.
It would pipe everything, I believe.
Okay, so maybe not just, maybe audio only is not on the table. I have not installed the beta yet, sadly.
Yeah, it basically pipes the full screen over with audio. And I believe you could actually, as an alternative to Mac Virtual Display, to the AirPlay receiver thing, as an alternative, if you do want the audio, I'm not sure quality-wise.
I can't imagine.
It's got to be
Mac Virtual
worse.
Display, there's a lot of secret knobs.
It is, yeah.
Twisted in the if you've done, I don't know if you had the experience of using screen sharing from one Mac to another Mac since the current Sonoma release, but there is now whenever you initiate a session, unless you save this preference. There is a choice between whether you want standard screen sharing, which I assume is just VNC with very naive optimizations, or if you want high performance screen sharing, which has to be on a local network, and I think is utilizing a lot of the same tricks that happen when you're using Mac Virtual Display. In fact, it's almost certain that like the reason that option is there is because they knew that the Vision Pro was coming.
Yeah. Is it a bummer to you that audio didn't get added this year with visionOS 2 to Mac Virtual Display? Like, that seems like a major...
It seems like an oversight, and I'll tell you, I thought about installing visionOS 2 beta just to try the new Mac Virtual Display to see if it pipes audio, only to realize that also Mac Virtual Display is not currently in the betas, like the updates.
Not. Yeah, it's just the same old.
So at that point, I feel like I would be downloading bugs without a lot of upside.
I will tell you, it seems as stable or more stable than visionOS 1.2.
I sort of wonder whether or not, like, because visionOS landed, it came in so hot and it came in so late. I almost wonder whether the 2 label here is kind of just marketing, because it's not getting the same raft of other platform upgrades that the other platforms are getting. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's as stable for that reason.
Yeah, and I think they've been making it, working on it for a bit here, for sure. And hopefully beta 2 is just as stable as beta 1, as we know that stuff can change. And yeah, it's getting a lot of the other, like the Photos app, it's getting all the fancy stuff as well as the 3D stuff, but it is getting the new organization in there as well.
This year's WWDC, more than any of the last 10 or so that I've been watching closely. Well, certainly, I guess the beta season wasn't what it is now. So definitely in the era of modern dub betas, it's never been less clear what versions are going to land in what betas and when, especially with Apple Intelligence. It feels like Apple should be posting a spreadsheet to their beta page explaining what's toggled on and off in each platform, because right now it's up to like some schmuck at Mac Rumors who downloads all these and then reports what's in and what's out of them, and it seems kind of inefficient.
Yeah, I was thinking of you with since you all work with a Mac Studio in your room as well as the MacBook Air. We learned that the iPhone continuity feature would not work through Mac Virtual Display. I was just thinking,
interesting,
because you can only do one at a time. Like I can't. So evidently, like you can't use Sidecar alongside iPhone continuity camera as an example. So for whatever reason, they limit it. Maybe it's a bandwidth issue, or they just feel unconfident to do both at the same time.
I suspect it has to do with the degree to which they rely on like peer-to-peer Wi-Fi and even Bluetooth stuff. Like there's a lot happening in a side channel with like Bonjour or MDNS whenever you're doing one of the really fancy kinds of sharing between devices. But it's just funny you say that, because just today I was on my MacBook Air on the Vision Pro in Mac Virtual Display, and then opened screen sharing to screen share into this Mac Studio to prep for today's call.
Yeah.
So, you're just 2 layers deep then into a screen sharing session. So I don't, it's not bandwidth per se, right? It's some sort of limitation in how they've cooked up these cockamamie features.
Yeah. So when iPhone continuity comes out, I'm imagining like I open screens up and access the Apple Vision Pro to get to my iPhone that way or something. Like I could see like some weird workarounds to do this.
And that's, I guess this is just the end game of all of the continuity stuff that Apple's been building for so long. Is it becomes recursive, right?
Yeah.
I think it was easier to market, and it made more sense when you could AirPlay from a Mac to an Airport Express.
Yeah.
Right. But now that but also your Apple TV can actually AirPlay audio back to the Mac. Like, for the average person, the existence of all this two-way, this Ouroboros of the snake eating its tail with, you could share to that and then share back to that and then share to the original Mac, and create an infinite loop. Like, it's really good that they're giving people these tools, but I think it makes it way harder even for you and I to talk about what device are we using right now.
Yeah.
Is confusing.
And it's a shame to me that the Mac has become the only place that really does all this. Like, I can't on my iPad control another iPad with its trackpad and keyboard. I think I should be able to. I wish, like, the iPhone mirroring, why not bring that to Vision Pro? Like, everything's like, they built this stuff for the Mac, and it seems like that's where it's all centered around currently.
Yeah, that's a really good point. At least the iPad is going to be getting the screen sharing where you can do tech support for mom,
yes,
or dad. With the pencil, and you can draw on the screen and you can touch things. That's an improvement, but it's not like a self-service thing that you can do iPad to iPad yourself and just initiate a remote session.
Yeah, and I will tell you, it's wildly fun using the headless MacBook Air with just 2 iPads in front of you and controlling them both from one input. Like, they should add that to just iPad OS as a thing versus needing the Mac to be involved.
Yeah, I'm curious too whether or not like as they keep building out the iPad into its own lane and defining itself as its own kind of computer with the various handrails and safety guards to make sure that it's basically if their North Star is the iPad is the computer that you can't screw up, which I think, if it's not literally printed on a wall, that sure seems to be their marching orders. Certain things are fundamentally safe and should be allowed just because they are safe. Like if that's your North Star, then virtualization is the safest thing you can do, right? Because everything's in a sandbox. Running a JIT inside of a virtualized computer can't hurt you because it can't get back out to the host, right?
Yeah.
Same goes for whenever you're remoting in and virtualize, screen sharing into another computer. And so for that reason alone, it seems like it should at least be on the table as something that they could get around to in the future. Yeah.
And it'd be very natural to control your iPhone from an iPad that has a touchscreen as well, which would be a nice thing.
Yeah. That's going to be so weird on the Mac. I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I can't use Sidecar on the Mac to do it because I only one at a time, so...
Right.
That'd be nice to have Sidecar to use that stuff too. But anyways, enough about that. The wild features. I love continuity. That's like Apple's A-team, I think, as far as like thinking things through in fun ways.
And it actually works. So kudos to that.
It does. You could even have if you're a crazy person that has like 10 iPads, I think you could literally have like 5 iPads each side of you, and they'd all work 3 different control one to the other, and it figures that stuff out. Like it does a good job with that stuff. Yeah.
They probably have the most fun lab. Like their
right.
office
Yes.
at Apple Park is probably the coolest.
Like,
where they actually do have some dude who's got 10 iPads back to back to make sure that universal control can go in a full circle if you've got 8 of them in a grid.
Yeah. So you recently went on a trip to Japan, as you mentioned. Did the Apple Vision Pro come along for that ride?
Yes. So I've been traveling, and I've blogged about this a bit over the years. I'm a very light traveler. I travel with a Tom Bin Synapse 19, as in 19 liters. It's basically the size of like a grade school kid's backpack, but it's got very carefully designed pockets where I can put like, 2 changes of clothes, a workout clothes, a toiletry bag, all in sort of the front pockets, and then I have the main compartment for a computer, and then whatever else I might have acquired that I need to haul around. I wanted on this trip, even though I was going to be gone for 6 weeks, and maybe in part because I was going to be gone for 6 weeks, I wanted to take the Vision Pro with me. And so I upgraded to the 25-liter version of the same bag to give myself just enough space that I could cram the Vision Pro into the front of the main compartment. So it's like there's cloth there that segregates it from everything else. And it's right in the middle of the package, and everything else is kind of clothy. And so I thought, I don't need to buy some custom case. I don't necessarily need to wrap it in something. I just bought a $10 spongy thing from Amazon that would go in front of the lenses to make sure that nothing would clink the lenses.
Yeah.
And that, in general, other than me having packed it in pretty tight, the most successful thing about me bringing it was packing it and carrying it in a bag successfully. I went only with the whatever the secondary is, the dual loop band.
Okay.
Right?
You didn't bring your
that's
more crazy.
No.
Yeah. We'll talk about the head strap in a minute.
We'll talk about head straps later. But ultimately, the thing that made it difficult, and this is actually, I thought of this right when you were saying that having a headless MacBook Air, when the keys get all, banged on, it'll wake up and it'll probably run down its battery and so forth. Vision Pro will wake up when it's in a place like that, like when movement happens in a certain way. I would just hear its little, happy chime in my bag while I'm on the bus or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I'd groan because I'd know that like that probably means that when I actually open it up and I go to my hotel tonight, the battery is going to be totally dead. And sure enough, every time battery is totally dead. And so I got in the habit eventually of disconnecting the battery, which shuts down the Vision Pro, before packing and before traveling every day. But then that just increased the burden of pulling it out and using it. Because then you got to start up and then you got to kind of get yourself situated again. And so all of that was
one thing you will enjoy, visionOS 2, the apps will reopen. So that'll be a nice thing for travel.
I saw that, and I'm not sure if I love that or not. I hate that feature on the Mac, and I wish I could turn it off harder than I can because
it is an option in settings, I will say.
Well, that's good. In the Mac, there's still no way to say when this boots up again, just give me nothing. And that's often what I want, because usually if I'm intentionally restarting any of their devices, it's so that I can reclaim resources.
Yeah.
And so nothing's more frustrating to me than restarting a Mac. Having it open the 15, power-hungry apps that I just had open.
Right.
Fortunately, you don't have that problem on iOS or iPad. But I saw that news, and that would have fixed that particular problem.
Yeah.
But a problem it wouldn't have fixed, and this is the nail in the coffin for me using this thing on the road, and this is such a bummer. If you're, and you probably know this well by now, if you're using Mac Virtual Display and neither the Mac nor Vision Pro is on a Wi-Fi network, the Wi-Fi NIC, the network interface, is enabled.
Yep.
But you're not on a Wi-Fi and it's not on a Wi-Fi, you can use Mac Virtual Display.
Yep.
I presume this is so that you can use it on planes.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
If either is on a network and it has high latency, something happens.
Okay.
And the input latency gets really, really bad. And so think every free open SSID, no captive portal, hotel Wi-Fi ever. So I stayed in probably 20 different hotels, and every single one I tried, if I was typing on my MacBook Air, it would take probably 300 to 900 milliseconds to show up on the Vision Pro. In Mac Virtual Display. But if I dropped Wi-Fi from both of them, then it would be instantaneous, right? Because it's all happening in peer-to-peer Wi-Fi, which is just so frustrating that the only way I could be productive was to also be offline effectively.
Yeah.
And so an individual user's network quality apparently matters way more than I was giving it credit for. And before we started recording the show, I said I don't know what the point of getting that developer strap would be, but apparently here's a good use case because that's the one thing that does transmit over the cable.
Yeah, I have this little mobile router thing that I can plug my iPhone into, and it broadcasts that as a little Wi-Fi thing. So, and I don't know tethering in Japan. Like, you probably don't want to burn through data either in that way.
Yeah, probably not. But like, we get to this sort of game at a certain point where it's like, how many individual devices do I have to pack in these tiny bags just to use my computer?
Exactly. Yeah.
And my takeaway wasn't, oh man, Vision Pro or MacBook Air or this feature isn't up to snuff. It's that this thing's got an M2. I wish that Mac OS was just an app.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Totally.
I didn't need to have this albatross of a MacBook Air also here.
Yeah, for sure. But you would need a keyboard and trackpad thing too with it.
Yep. True.
For sure. But yeah, I do wish you could just run Mac apps as like you can install iPad apps. Why not just let me install this Mac app? I think you need the whole OS because the Mac needs certain things, but
you have an app and just call it Mac.
Yes.
and you go into it and it looks just like Mac Virtual Display. They've already done all that, right?
Yeah.
And that's what people, as MG Sigler writes this thing about iPad, right? And that's effectively what he wants. It's like, just cut the Mac out of the equation. We're golden.
Yeah.
I got a question for you because you mentioned, again, well, you would need the trackpad and the keyboard. Do you think about the Vision Pro, I'm sure, as much as anybody outside Apple? Do you foresee them coming up with a typing solution that does not require a hardware accessory, but it's worse than right now. It's probably, of all of the built-in software keyboards that Apple does, whether it's iPad, iPhone, Apple TV, the Vision one is, in my opinion, by far the worst in terms of usability. Do you think they'll come up with something better?
I don't know. They must have tried, like, let's put a keyboard on a table in front of me and just type. They must have already tried that and it didn't work. Because that was the thing I was thinking, like, can they have a mode where you're sitting at a table and the keyboard's just in front of you? And clearly that didn't work because they probably would have shipped that, right?
Or maybe not that it didn't work, but that it wasn't the slam dunk. Like, it would have required engineering effort that they couldn't invest for launch, right?
Right.
And apparently also not for visionOS 2. If they don't figure that out, no one really talks about this. I mean, we talked about it like when the visionOS or Vision Pro first launched. If they don't figure out how to make input be fantastic while you're inside of it, I think that this device and the platform, really, its reputation, as well as just the feedback mechanism of like, what are people using it for? Well, I guess we'll improve those things. Similar to how the watch, right, kind of like became a health device because like people were just using it for fitness and not using it for the other things.
Yeah.
I worry that if they don't figure out how to like let normal people type on it or normal people click as fast as they can click if it was a mouse as opposed to their eyeballs, then it's going to end up getting pigeonholed as just an entertainment device or just a VNC terminal to just some other device. Yeah,
I mean, dictation works pretty well, but you don't want to be dictating all the time. You really don't,
Yeah, it works fairly well, but like, even in cases where it's like I'm in a URL bar, right? Like, and I'm in Safari and I want to dictate a URL. I will say, I'll look at the mic and I will say, I want to go to theverge.com.
Yeah.
And half the time it'll figure out what I want, but the other half the time it will type like the space verge space dot space com.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
At least that Google will know where it wants to take me, but it would be a cop-out. Like, really, actually, fundamentally, and I'm going back now to thinking about like when I first got the Vision Pro, what some of my impressions were. It's almost like there are more ways to interface with it. You've got like the voice control, you've got eyeballs, you got finger pinches, you've got all these accessories. You have Siri is actually pretty well integrated into the operating system functions. But they're all, it's like a jack of all trades thing. None of them are amazing.
Yeah.
None of them are the best of any of Apple's platforms. They're all just barely good enough to get by. And so it's really hard for me as a creative person to like get into flow and feel like I'm actually mastering this tool.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if they could come up with some creative solution where you're using both hands for typing in some way. And I don't know. It's weird as far as the input.
One idea I just had while we were speaking was, if you had something like American Sign Language, right?
Mm-hmm.
people who are bought into the Vision Pro as a real professional, right? They might be willing to put in the same amount of effort that I put in when I had a Palm Pilot in 2000, right?
Yeah.
Of learning the graffiti keyboard stylus or stylus handwriting recognition. So if there were certain gestures that I could make and that I could type really quickly.
Even certain words could be a single gesture, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what sign language is, right?
Right, versus just the ABC. So
it makes me wonder whether or not some sort of gesture shorthand could work, but the current state is just not good enough. And I think if they don't invest in getting themselves out of that box, they're gonna really limit what this platform can be used for.
No, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I learned Morse code to play the game Sub Wars on the Nintendo 3DS because that was the communication style in that game. It was like, you're going to use Morse code. We have the key right here on the second screen. And over the course of whatever the 50 hours I played that, by the end of it, I knew Morse code. And like, yeah.
That's so cool. What a great use of the, across the Nintendo DS and the 3DS. I had I was a big game follower.
Yeah.
But very few bottom screen experiences were really worth it.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
That one's very clever. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. No, that was such a cool thing. It's like, it seems silly at the beginning, but it's like, oh, this is just such a natural fit, and it's kind of fun to learning this in this way.
I love when video games trick people into learning.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant trick they can do, and yeah, Nintendo did it great. I love that game. It's like a slow, like methodical, like thought out first person shooter as a submarine where you need to think through all your actions more than the chaotic stuff that most of those are.
Which one was that? Steel Diver, or was that?
This was the sequel, Sub Wars, which was an online kind of team or one-on-one game, and I think the servers got shut down recently. Just sad.
Yeah, I actually I never played it, but I know one of the developers at Nintendo who worked on that game, so I will give him a shout out from you after the call.
This episode is sponsored by Agenda, which recently rolled out version 19. In this break, I want to share a little bit about Agenda and some of the new advanced searches you can now do in the new Agenda 19. Agenda is the app I use to prepare for and plan all of my podcast interviews across both Vision Pros and iPad Pros. I love how it integrates with my calendar to make sure I hit the appropriate deadlines for my episodes, and the collaboration built into Agenda has been transformative to how I work with my guests. Agenda is available on the Apple Vision Pro through an awesome iPad app that was built with the trackpad in mind, which means it translates beautifully for eye tracking, something not all iPad apps achieve in visionOS. The Mac app is another awesome way to work with Agenda if you are using the Mac Virtual Display. The Mac app follows all of the Mac paradigms you expect and is a first-class experience there, and you can tell the Mac app was built by those that love the Mac. In Agenda 19, the search experience was completely rebuilt. Here are a few tips for building out that perfect search that you can then save as a smart overview to pull up at any time. Entering a single term will pull up all notes that contain that term in the content of the note, the title, or in tags. By entering multiple terms, you'll pull up those notes that contain all of the terms included. You can also restrict searches to certain tags or people by using the hashtag symbol for tags or the @ for people. By using the / in search, there's a whole avenue of different criteria you can include. Some of the more intriguing ones to me include linked -event, which will pull in all notes that have an event tied to a note. After entering this, you can select yes or no. Agenda will also let you link a note to a certain day with no event linked, and this filter will only pull in notes linked to an actual event. Another interesting search is the /calendar. By doing this, it will let you select any of your calendars and pull in notes linked to that calendar. This is a great way to filter your notes down to a personal or work filter based on the calendar. You can even get more creative if you want to start adding extra calendars to the mix and linking events to those calendars. Two other searches I find super interesting are edited -date and creation -date. By using both of these, you could create a very interesting smart overview that will help you pull in all of the notes that you've created or edited recently that you may not have a date yet attached to. The thing that impresses me the most with this new search system is not just how robust the search is, letting you search for practically any data tied to that note, but how it lets you take advantage of these searches. Beyond just the basic searches, you can filter down your entire agenda library. As you bounce from project to project, that filter will remain in place, allowing you to look over your entire catalog of notes with that filter in place. It's something super powerful, and I wish more apps did. The other thing that impresses me is you can create a smart overview out of any of the searches you create. These live at the top of the sidebar, allowing you to quickly return to these searches. Both of these are super powerful and expand beyond what most apps do with search. If you want to learn more about all the powerful searches you can create, there's an in-depth search syntax cheat sheet in the Agenda community that will be linked to in the show notes of this episode. If you haven't tried Agenda, I'd really encourage you to give it a shot. Agenda is free to download and use with no obtrusive ads. To unlock the full power of Agenda, give Agenda Premium a shot. One thing that Agenda continues to do that I love is their approach to premium features and unlocks. If you ever decide to cancel your Agenda Premium subscription, you get to keep all the Agenda Premium features available to you when you were a subscriber, or you can opt for their lifetime unlock, which will unlock the full power of Agenda on all of your Apple devices with a single one-time purchase. To learn more, go to agenda.com. Download Agenda 19 today for free from the App Store. My thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of Vision Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com. So, getting the Apple Vision Pro in February has, like, the expectations you had for it, and did it kind of live up to what you were hoping for, or not so much?
Well, the zeitgeist right now is the not so much, right? Like, if you follow just the general arc of media, everyone's talking, oh, it's a disappointment for this or that reason. Of course, several, I think Nilay Patel was had probably the best negative valence review that I read. As somebody who is subscribed, you, dear listener, to a podcast about the Vision Pro, I assume that you are probably in a subgroup of not just the mainstream, Apple news consumer, much less news consumer. I rode the exact same wave with VR gaming, right? Or any niche thing where your niche thing isn't the most popular niche thing, as like, if you were an Apple user in the 90s, you are also familiar. Or yeah, we're talking about Nintendo. If you were a Nintendo diehard fan during, the GameCube and the PS2 was smoking it, right?
Yeah.
Like, or the Wii U, God forbid.
Yeah, I love the Wii U. It's like the Wii U. That's what I got back in the gaming, was when the Wii U came out on the 3DS. It's like, oh, I got my own. I'm an adult now. Let me get back in the gaming. I missed out during the college years, and the Wii U was my first one, and I had a blast with that system. I never had a Wii, and I played all those games too the first time. Yeah, so anyways.
Maybe Tim, you're just a lover of poorly understood platforms.
Clearly.
No, Mario Maker was one of the best experiences that you could have in gaming, and it could only work on that one device, right?
Yep.
Even the Switch sequel couldn't really do
No.
So in any case, if you've ever been a fan of something that the mainstream passed on, what we're currently experiencing with the Vision Pro is you have to make your own fun. You are the captain of your own ship. You can't just listen to some, talking head on, a podcast or anywhere else to validate that the thing you like is great. It's really got to come more intrinsically. And I think that's probably a good skill to learn generally. And so for me, in my relationship with using the Vision Pro as a tool, it's strictly, I've narrowed it down at this point to the functions and features that I am very, from which I derive a lot of value.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that are, either superfluous or frustrating, I just have gradually stopped using them.
Okay.
So for me, I'm on the Mac Virtual Display probably 80% of the time that I'm on a Mac. The only limiting factor typically is if I'm leaving the house, or if my eyes might get a little tired after 5-6 hours.
Okay.
Other features, like I love Adam Lizagor's television app, and I'll have like a YouTube mix of music, often a television, often in the side. So you haven't played with television. I think it's a great way to add some ambiance, especially while you're working on a screen. Mm-hmm. The settings app I will use to do settings.
Yes.
The Safari I will use when I have no other option. There are just so few. The music app, interestingly, like series control in the music app on the Vision Pro is maybe better then its ability to control music on any other platform, it's almost like they wrote something special just for it.
Interesting.
And so if you're just trying to play music on the headset, it'll listen to you, and it does a very good job in my experience. And also, it's the only platform for which the iTunes mini player actually makes sense.
Yes.
Where you can shrink the whole window down to just that, and then when you look at the mini player, then you see the play pause back forth.
Yeah.
I think that's lovely. But apart from those. That basket of goods, I kind of just at this point I'm not touching anything else on the Vision Pro, and that much is a disappointment.
Yeah.
Because the platform is capable of so much more. It's just a chicken and egg with what software is available and the frustrations that we were previously discussing about input.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Because I've got like almost 300 apps installed in the Vision Pro, and
wow,
I was glad organization came with visionOS 2. And like right now, as I'm recording this, I don't often have the headset on as I'm recording a podcast, but I had to record away from my desk today, so this was the natural fit. But it's really nice having Mac Virtual Display with audio hijack, and you're in the FaceTime window there, and then next to it is a vertical window of Agenda, the iPad app, and it's really nice having just a big text box that I can just manipulate and use there. So I wasn't sure if like in your development work, if you'd ever like want to just have a drafts window open as a second window kind of thing next to your Mac.
There's want things and then actually use things.
Okay.
So yes, I want that thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, I've tried on several occasions because I use Things,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that Things 3's Vision port is phenomenal. Cultured Code, I believe it's just two folks, and Things is a great to-do app, and their Vision Pro update, or I guess it's a separate SKU.
Yeah, separate SKU
in the App Store
with all their apps. Yeah.
It is so great. It is so perfectly suited for the platform. It's got some of the foibles that the rest of the platform does, but I would kind of chalk that up to sort of like framework level, like Apple layer bugs.
Yeah.
So my dream would be I'm looking at my Mac, and then my Things is off as a checklist of what I'm doing to the right.
Yeah.
The problem is that when you're using Mac Virtual Display and you're controlling with a trackpad and a keyboard, in my experience, the input is disconnected, which breaks continuity between the Mac and whatever you're looking at off to the side.
Mm-hmm.
That happens just often enough that I can't trust it.
Oh, that's a bummer. Yeah. And
so as a result, I had two reactions when they announced the ultra-wide thing at WWDC. One was, oh, so that's what they meant by two 4K displays, right? It's not like two 4K displays with a weird seam in the middle like you would if you had physical monitors. As soon as I saw that, I was like, duh, yeah, sure. But the second thing was, now with this wraparound, sort of, it looks like they're probably reusing the same kind of arc as the when you look at a panoramic photo, right, with the ultra wide where it kind of wraps around you. Now that they're going to have a more immersive, I suppose you could call it, Mac experience, that makes what I just described of having the Mac display with like the Things checklist next to it even harder to justify, because if I've got this Mac wraparound, unless I'm on a swivel chair, I'm not going to flip around and look at some other thing behind me.
Yeah.
And if I'm looking up, that gets awkward, or you pull up Control Center accidentally. So and this is what I kind of mean, is like, as long as the constraints of the platform are what they are, they're going to like look at analytics and usage data, and they're going to be users of the platform themselves. And like, if everyone's only using this thing for Mac Virtual Display, they're going to think, well, how can we make that better? But then they make it better in a way that crowds out the ability for Vision native apps to thrive, because the Vision, more people's field of view is taken up by the Mac.
Yeah, that's a great point, where like right now, that makes a lot of sense to have. I've got a Safari window next to me, then the Agenda, then the Mac Virtual Display, but having a more wraparound window, that's going to change things a bit, maybe. I'm curious how they implement the wraparound window, because currently windows seem to be rectangles. They don't curve. This will be different.
It's that's a good point. The only ones that curve are like a panoramic photo in Photos curves,
and it's a fully immersive thing. This will be the first non-fully immersive window, right? Are they fully immersive? Like, windows up and around while you're in a panorama? No, you hit the panorama, then it takes over everything.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, then you're right. Yeah, interesting. So clearly, that's actually encouraging to hear, because one of the things that I found to be limiting about the if you think about the visionOS as a platform, like the original Mac was a platform, the way that the platform is defined is like a human interface guideline thing. Like there's certain rules to the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like everything is a rectangle with sharp edges and a little like XE disclosure thing and a little grabby bar thing at the bottom. You know, like and you learn the usage language as you use it, but I feel like it's too constrained. I feel like it's sort of silly for me to put a 3-dimensional thing on my head with total field of view, and all I can do is put a bunch of iPad rectangles everywhere.
Yes.
So hearing that, to your point, now that with this realization that, yes, this is a new kind of primitive in the operating system, that gives me some hope that like we could have a rhombus-shaped view, right? Because like if you're building out a heads-up display, if you were like, imagining this like a helmet with a whole bunch of different like a HUD of a whole bunch of different stuff, like a video game.
Yeah.
You would need differently shaped stuff than just rectangles.
Yeah, and maybe once they roll this out, visionOS 3, they figure out this new window type that other developers could do these kind of wrap-around windows, which haven't existed yet in this way.
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yep, I hope so.
So the blog post you wrote that got me on your radar was this idea of comparing the cost of Apple Vision Pro to your Mac Studio setup and walking through the value proposition of Apple Vision Pro. And something I was frustrated with that ATP was them saying it's such an unknown, the value of Apple Vision Pro versus an expensive Mac, which we already know. The Mac will get our job done and whatnot. We're not quite sure on the Apple Vision Pro, and like $3,500 versus a Mac Studio at that cost. Can you share your thoughts regarding the kind of the value proposition here versus a beefy, expensive Mac desktop?
Yeah, so if you link to the blog post in the show notes, people will be able to see like me talking at greater length and with more bullet points and with numbers. But at the end of the day, the genesis of me writing that was probably listening to ATP, being annoyed that these dudes who 2 of them have Pro Display XDRs that are $6,000
Yes.
out the door.
Yeah.
And one of them has, I think, now 3 Apple Studio displays or 2 Apple Studio displays and an LG 5K LG Fine Display 5K thing, and all of them in sort of like a battle station. And in any one of their offices, that's more cost sunk into displays than the Apple Vision Pro, which is the last display you'll ever need.
Yeah.
And better in a lot of ways. Now, like Marco will complain that his eyes are, don't agree with it, and there's not a lot you can do with that. Everyone's got different rods and cones, and they see stereoscopic 3D differently.
It's very funny with that because so outside I generally don't need glasses during the daytime. I'm good with that. And with computers and stuff, like I often like stuff a little smaller and stuff, so I'll need like computer glasses. But so just nice throwing on the Apple Vision Pro with the perfect prescription for what I'm looking at in this environment, where it's one of the few computer environments where I don't need to like let me make sure I got the right my right eye is on for this thing, which is such a nice experience with that.
And I get eye fatigue looking at really small text, and so when I'm on a Mac, I will like full screen my VS Code editor or whatever or terminal I'm in, and I will just mash on Command Plus until the width of my display, no matter how big the display is exactly 80 characters.
Yeah,
because I'm the developer or the writer who always keeps every line to 80 characters.
Yeah.
And I have the little like red bar at the side to kind of like be a guideline. So if I'm never going to have a line wider than that, in my brain, I'm like, why wouldn't I just make the font as big as possible?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Like, what's the point of just having some like random splash of desktop wallpaper behind me? Like, I want to use the full display. And so I'm the same way. So like when I hear those guys talk about their $6,000 displays and how much they love them, or Syracuse's got his 1,000 little tiny windows.
Yes.
I could understand that if you're that precious about window management, the Vision Pro would be a turnoff. But for me, who just wants to have a super immersive, very focused, unitasking, immersive productivity experience, I start Mac Virtual Display. I just make it as big as probably about 140-inch equivalent theater screen, and as close to my face as I can without the text being uncomfortable to read left to right. And so I don't have prescription lenses, but from my perspective and for my money, not only is it great from like a neck and a posture perspective, but it's exactly tailored to however my eyes want to see the text. And you know, if you've got a 32-inch 6K monitor, it is what it is. You're at the mercy of how nice your hinge is for adjusting.
Yeah, for sure. And the hinge you might have to adjust it over time as it kind of droops down sometimes, depending.
Or pay another $1,000 to get one that doesn't droop down or doesn't bounce with your keyboard. So anyway, the point being, right? Like I'm listening to this podcast, I'm like, these guys with these $6,000 displays are shitting on a $3,500 product that is also, and it also happens to be a computer, right? That can do a handful of other things as well. But if you just look at it as a monitor, and that's what I was kind of buying, you know, and that's why when I went in, I knew I'd be happy with mine, because what I was doing was I was upgrading my 1080p Xreal Glasses to one that I knew would be an amazing display. And yes, that's 10 times more expensive, but that's sort of like, you know, that's the rub, and I was happy to roll with it because right now, you know, I'm looking at you with a 6K display that is the Dell one, and it cost. I think I paid exactly the same amount of money as I did for the Vision Pro, and I can tell you, like, I'm far less satisfied with this purchase than I am with the Vision Pro.
As far as disappointments, we talked about a little bit of them already. Is there anything we didn't cover as far as disappointments?
Well, I'm an easily disappointed person, so I'm sure that that has happened. I will say that in general, I am not sure that Apple timed the release just right. They wanted to get it out the door. They knew the hardware was locked. They probably had them in production. They believe. I believe they believed that they had to ship something so that they could iterate and then roll like they do with their other platforms. I think by doing it now, and calendar-wise, February probably makes a way more sense to them than just about any other time of year because it would disrupt Mac or iPhone releases or sales. So
right, like waiting for visionOS 2 in September would have been terrible because that's iPhone time, and you don't want to do both at the same time.
From you know, I'm glad I don't have Tim Cook problems, but like I'm sure if you consider the implications for like retail training or retail like busyness, right, with the demos that they were doing or the supply chain considerations, like I get it. It probably came out when it had to come out if it was going to happen this year. On the flip side, the fact that it shipped without spatial personas, the fact that it shipped with as many kind of early days bugs of, you know, a lot of people had trouble getting the calibration stuff to work. They had to fix a lot of things. And again, maybe these are things that they never would have found until it was out in the wild. But the experience was just constrained enough that I think, and we saw this with VR gaming too, people's first impressions, and those impressions are almost always mediated by the media, some review that they saw on YouTube or whatever. People's first impressions tend to stick, and they tend to be defining for new platforms. So the Apple Watch is kind of an anomaly that like it's enough that it's the only 2 or 3 things that the first one was good at, and the other things could fall away. I feel like Apple really would have benefited from leaving it in the oven even just 3 or 4 months longer, and having a couple stronger arguments of here's what to use it for.
Yeah.
That's a little disappointing. The other thing that stands out, and I'm sure you know even you with 300 apps installed, probably think about in the Apple blogosphere of people who think about Apple stuff, talk about Apple stuff. I think a lot of them are frustrated, and they kind of hand wave away to like, well, whether it's the DMA or it's app store policies and how Apple is unkind or unfriendly to developers. And that is why none of these developers are supporting the Vision Pro. I don't really buy that cause and effect argument. I think what it is that the Apple Vision Pro is a very, very small, tiny nascent platform where if you're any developer, it's a collective action problem. If you're any developer of any system, of any app, of any platform, of any social media network or streaming service, for you to invest the engineering effort to port it well to the Vision Pro, you need some reason. And if the users aren't there, then you're not going to do it because there's no reason. And if all of the app makers all decide that simultaneously, then like it creates this chicken and egg. I think that Apple didn't. If Apple had like totally free reign, opened the whole thing up and said, you know what, it's going to be just like the Mac, you can install anything you want, I don't think we would have 5 more apps than we do today. We'd have like a Steam Link app where you could use it for Steam, and I would be thrilled by that.
Yeah.
Right? But again, that's just me using it as a fancy screen sharing tool.
Right.
Instead, I really think that what Apple could have done, because they're sitting on tens of billions of dollars, is pay developers money, cash money dollars, to seed the platform with great experiences.
Game consoles do this all the time.
Yep. And it's and those ones even sell the hardware at a loss, and they're still doing it, right? So you could have hired a bunch of game studios to make a bunch of games. You could have much more inexpensively paid off every single developer of indie Mac and iOS apps, right? Like, line them up on the wall and just say, look, out of appreciation for you who's been so active in the community, we are willing to give you a grant of, call it $200,000, right? If you'll release this app in this time frame with this kind of like, parity of features, right? With your other apps. And some sort, like, a lot of indie Mac and iPhone developers, they don't make that much money off those apps. Like, it would be a non-trivial amount of money, but from Apple's perspective, it would be such a drop in the bucket. And they'd win all these good guy points of like how they're being intentional and like developer happy. So it's just outside of how Apple thinks and works. And I'm sure that internally they'd be thinking of creating a moral hazard where now everyone's going to expect to get paid up front or something to do anything. But they just did this on Apple Arcade and had a way more successful Apple Arcade launch than they would have if it was just a form that you filled out, right? Like they partnered with a bunch of studios.
They worked with developers on Apple Arcade, paid them up front. Yeah.
And now have they continued that investment? No. But the Apple Arcade is an ongoing service, and Vision Pro is a platform that needed to make a splash, if that's what it was going to be. But ultimately, and I think the reason that they didn't do it is they knew that the worst thing that could happen is for this product to become an absolute runaway hit, and then them not be able to deliver it at capacity for 1-2 years because of how many micro OLEDs Sony can make. So I keep coming back to this, like, no matter how much I talk about what the Vision Pro 1.0 could have been, I keep coming back to it's a dev kit. It's an expensive dev kit, and they just don't want to call it that. And
yeah, or like an early adopter hardware as well. Like people that are excited about new things, Yeah.
So all the coulda, shoulda, wouldas kind of don't matter, because with the all of the constraints that they're operating under, I'm not sure that we could have arrived at a drastically different outcome.
Yeah, it's funny. Earlier you mentioned you were trying to get the pre-order in as soon as possible. I was the same way. It's like, oh, they only have X number. I want one day one. And they're making me do the face scan there. This is very stressful. Then turns out it was not a hard thing to do.
You had way more time than you thought.
Yes, exactly. And it was very telling in the visionOS 2 how they advertised the new Safari ability and I guess video player in general ability to play your videos in Apple environments, mainly for Netflix and YouTube and Safari. And they're not having those apps. We're enabling this cool new feature, which is pretty telling.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And, obviously when we're talking about big company versus big company, and they all are trying to build their walled gardens, and they all are operating under different, drastically different incentives, I don't think that there's a way to solve that problem. But I do think that Apple has an opportunity. I think what Apple's going to have to do now is, when they have a mainstream-friendly Vision Pro, they're going to have to reintroduce the product entirely. Probably use the same name. I think the brand power, because it's kind of got a little bit of a Halo car effect, is good. It's not like this is a failure, but they're going to have to introduce it in a much more pragmatic way. Yes, this is the best way to watch videos and movies, but also it's got to do X, Y, and Z. Things that are currently not possible when it's just an iPad on your face.
Right, yeah. And it was kind of interesting. Paramount Plus rolled out their visionOS app, but Netflix can't bother still. So that's been the most recent, I think, streamer to add a version of their app for Vision Pro. That's not an iPad app. As far as disappointment, I think comfort for many has been one. I'm using the Solo top adapter, and that's been a great solution for me. I really like how that works for me. Earlier on, I just did a very simple black Velcro. Someone made a black Velcro thing that went over the earpod things, and that was a pretty good solution, but it distorted the speakers a bit. What did you end up going with for your solution on comfort?
So I used for the Quest 2, and I'm looking at it right here. I have a Quest 2 with a Bobo VR Mark II headset, and I think this one is a Bobo VR Mark III headset. They're often referred to as Halo headsets, or because it sits on the crown of your head. So it puts most of the weight on the top of the head, where more weight can sit.
Yeah.
And then with a traditional sort of windy strap in the back or a knob to tighten. But it also has joints in 2 different places, so you can twist up the display portion as well as the back headset, and that allows you to get just enough, I think, movement and adjustment to be able to land at a place where the weight distribution is just right. So I have one of those plus a couple of 3D printed adapters just to kind of because it's designed for the Quest, to kind of shimmy them onto the audio pods and clip on there. So that one, I like it a lot. It's very comfortable from a weight distribution perspective. If you wear it with the light shield, the light shield, at least my sizing for the light shield, ends up being having like a really big air gap at the bottom.
Okay.
So it's kind of like pressed up against my forehead a bit too much. So because that doesn't sit quite right, it was only when our mutual friend Adam Lizagor pointed out to me that like people were doing this open face system where you'd take out the light shield entirely and then you restore your peripheral vision, you get airflow and whatnot. If you're just using it for virtual display, like not an immersive experience, it's actually quite nice. So that's what I've been doing since. So that's no light shield, 3D printed donguses, and the Bobo Mark III.
Did you look into the air cover thing where they add a little tiny place for your head to rest, and it's kind of like the without the light seal, but has a little bit of something for you?
I saw the link. I think they're not currently in stock. I don't know if this is something that's shipped and is getting replenished or what.
Yeah.
But it looks it's a clever design. It looks similar to where the parts and pieces are currently landing on my head, with just like a little bit less coverage, like right on the top of your head, right, to capture the weight. But I think that idea is ergonomically an improvement. And, it's something we didn't talk about individually in terms of disappointments and stuff, but I really do feel like Apple prioritized form over function in both straps that they're currently shipping. And I don't think that's the reason it's selling what it's selling or anything like that, but it does make me worry that Apple cares as much about how this thing looks as how well it feels and how well it fits people.
For sure. I wish they released that dual... basically the ones they had last year with the solo loop with the top band thing, because I love the solo thing, but it definitely needs a top thing for extra support. I also really like that it is fabric. Like with PSVR 2, if I want to watch a movie with it and want to lay down in bed with it, doing that, not comfortable having a hard plastic thing behind you. So it is nice having at least the option for these fabric bands, because it lets you... have you tried like with that band? I can't imagine having it rested against like a bed or something would be comfortable, right?
No, and it wouldn't be, because you've got a big plastic knob back there. It was a clever design for Apple to put the solo band's knob at the right. Normally you'd put that where people would be moving something back and forward. So yeah, that is one downside of my setup, is I have to be standing or sitting. I wouldn't like be lying flat down and watching something.
Yeah.
But the solo band as it is just, it gets a little bit too warm for me. So it is comfortable. I like the knit feel. It might not be as much of a problem if I wasn't using a light shield, but in general, you look at it, right, and it looks just goofy enough that anyone with any design sense or taste can look at that and know, like, this is not the correct answer to the question.
Yes.
Like, there's got to be a better design out there. And I think that Apple just they'd locked in their design for the product before anyone had spent a lot of time using the product. And then that's how you wind up with the dual loop band that looks like it was kind of like put together in an arts and crafts project.
Yes, and you get your hair kind of stuck in the Velcro and all of that. And it's nice that it is modular, where they release Apple Watch bands with new designs. Maybe they'll release some headbands even before a new Vision Pro comes out.
Yeah, one can dream. I think it might make sense if they've got something clever. It would be a cheap and straightforward thing to announce and share if they think it's going to be effective.
Yeah.
Because it could be, seriously now, if you're reading Mark Gurman's newsletter, it could be 2027 before we see another product.
Right, with the Pro name on it, which I'm fine with. I spent a lot of money on my 1 terabyte model. Long life cycle for this thing, but yeah, I think a new cheaper one where they can figure out what they can remove and have a good product out of, and use that extra time to make the Pro one even better, with the price reductions that can happen with the displays getting cheaper over time and all that.
Well, this is just late breaking news, but we were chatting before the show. I read Gruber's, during Fireball, his WWDC impressions, which I thought were pretty fantastic, and I totally agree. Like, I think a lot of people didn't understand what they were watching, but if you watch WWDCs a lot, what you were experiencing, you knew this right away. You're like, they just finished talking about iOS, and we are 20 minutes into this thing. What that means is that we're going to blow through operating system updates in an hour. And what that means is they have about an hour to talk about AI.
Yeah.
And that's why they're not using AI right now in the first half. And so as soon as I knew that was coming, I felt a huge, not a visceral relief, because I don't care. It's some other company. It's not my company. But I felt a sort of like a pause and a calm of like, yes, they've got this. Like, if they're going to devote that much time to anything, they're going to have spent a lot of time on figuring out and crafting the right message around AI. And I really do think that they nailed it. I think that this was about as good of a presentation as you could have given. Some people don't like the ChatGPT stuff made it at the end, and some people are frustrated that the ChatGPT stuff sort of overtook the public message and makes it sound like it's more of the experience than it really is. But ultimately, like, the audience of people who kind of like got that degree of information about it is the people who are day trading Apple stock and like Wall Street analysts, and like that was the intended audience for that.
For sure. And it's smart that they built out a system that they can plug any system into. So if there's like a medical large language model, they can put that in for a certain use. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So Gruber's, anyway, his takeaway is all great.
Yeah.
But then he has a bullet point about Apple Intelligence not coming to the Vision Pro, which was something that I had thought about, right? Because I fully expect.
Yeah, and some people asked Apple directly in the more public-facing PR stuff, and they were saying it was a prioritization thing about it. They just didn't have time to do it yet. But Gruber's, I'll read it off here. I copied it in my notes.
Yeah,
here.
do it.
So here's what he had to say. One reason is visionOS remains a dripping web new platform. Apple's still building the fundamentals, like rearranging and organizing apps in the home view. visionOS 2 isn't even getting math notes, which is a machine language, which, as mentioned above, isn't even under Apple Intelligence umbrella. But another reason is that, according to well-informed little birdies, Vision Pro is already making significant use of the M2's neural engine to supplement the R1 chip for real-time processing purposes, occlusion and object detection, things like that. With M-series equipped Macs and iPads, the neural engine is basically just sitting there, fully available for Apple Intelligence features, which the Vision Pro is already using. So it sounds like the M chips are maybe not as available for this stuff, even though there's 16 gigabytes of RAM in the Apple Vision Pro as well.
And that was, reading that last night was when my stomach sank, because it struck me as a Vision Pro user as very truthy. Like, whatever is in the R1, it feels, again, we don't know exactly how all this works and how these two processors communicate. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that what the R1 is doing is it's providing a real-time computer for all of the movement and the reprojection of frames and a lot of the stuff that you would need to happen in order to just have such a high bandwidth input-output device that operates in six-axis, three-dimensional space.
Yeah, basically, they made this point before on a lot of podcasts where most computers can idle, and they're not doing anything when they're idling. Like,
Right.
the Vision Pro, it never idles. It's like you're looking at your real world and it's rendering that and the windows and everything, and that's not even, there's no idle state.
And the R1, it's piping through all of that information into the M2, and the stuff that has anything to do with understanding the world around you, like he mentions object exclusion, like, seeing your keyboard in front of you and stuff. The part of the M series chips that would be dealing with that is indeed the neural engine. And so my feeling had been, whenever I kind of, tongue-in-cheek claim, man, I wish that the Mac was just an app in the Vision Pro.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really believed that they'd be able to do that, because I have gotten the sense that this is actually, it's an M2 and not an M1, because the M1 wouldn't have been enough. It's really taxing the M2 more than you might think. Has been my sense from the beginning. And if you just hold your finger above the top of the Vision Pro and how hot it gets, it seems to check out. So when I read that last night, that this product might never get Apple Intelligence, and also might not, based on other reporting, might not get replaced until late 2026 at the earliest, probably 2027. It just, in my mind, it means like Apple's Halo car is going to feel super duper dated when we go 3 WWDCs. And by the third year of Apple Intelligence, I suspect every feature is going to somehow have something to do with it. Or Siri is going to be so much better everywhere except for when you put your Vision Pro on. And it'll feel dated and fall behind and old, and people will be making jokes like they did with the original HomePods never getting updated and stuff. And of course, that's just floof. It doesn't really matter. But from a perception perspective, it makes their platform of the future look like it's stuck in the past, and that's not good.
Yeah, it's interesting with all that. Like, I have a activity monitor app for Vision Pro, and as we're just chatting here, I've got 5 of the CPU cores at like 70% usage and 3 not touched. I don't know if that's accurate at all, or if it's just a funny graphic, or how they can tie into that stuff. It'd be great to have like more data with like, here's the neural processors and what are those guys doing right now, to know.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm on my Mac and I've got, 3 of my, comical number of CPU cores, and none are above 40%.
Yeah.
So pretty much everything else is idle. To your point, right? Like the Vision Pro is always hustling. And that means that like, if it's never idle, like, so most of what the neural part of the chip does is very spiky, right? On the Macs, it's like, got a bunch of photos synced. I got to go do AI at them, right? And but that cannot happen in the background. It actually only happens when like the program's closed and people aren't in it, And so if the computer's under load, I can just defer that work to later. But a lot of the Apple Intelligence stuff, like it's got to be responsive, right? Because these are going to be features that are involved in the user interface. And if you're like, can imagine, like I'm moving my head, but I'm also trying to improve the tone of this email simultaneously. If that brings the system to a crawl, that's a bad experience.
Yeah, and I guess I was hoping the 16 gigabytes of RAM could overcome some of the stuff. So maybe they find solutions with all that extra. I don't know, is my 16 gigabytes of RAM, is that being taxed too? I have no idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like they expose it, right? I didn't even know for sure that there were 16 gigs of RAM. It's good to hear that there are. And when they say prioritization, like I choose to believe that they will find a way to ship this for the Vision Pro because they want to avoid the perception problem that I was describing, or like the gap in functionality in the operating systems. But under the covers, the solution might be the Vision Pro has to phone home to the server private compute all the time. Yeah.
And with there being less Vision Pro owners, it'd be less of a strain than doing that for every old iPhone.
Yeah.
Like if you rolled that server thing to every old iPhone, that'd be a mess. But Vision Pro owners, it's less a mess.
That's a good point. They paid for the privilege.
Yes. And I do wonder, we've been talking about the later update cycle for the Vision Pro. It must be difficult to just like do a chip upgrade, like throw an M4 or M5 in there with no other hardware improvements to do a very minor update in that way. It sounds like they don't want to do that.
if you think about my understanding and a few friends at Apple over the years is that during the Intel era, the reason we didn't get more speed bumps was because the certification and QA expense was very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
And you think like, okay, come on, like it's a MacBook, it's got an Intel chip in it. You plop the new one in, as long as the pins match, like you just go and kind of do a smoke test and Bob's your uncle. But Apple, operates at a scale that is so much bigger than really you can imagine. Just like, when literal millions of iPhones coming out of factories around the world every single day. I take that anecdota that I heard, 7-8 years ago, and I think about a product as complicated as this one. Putting another chip in, the number of things that could go wrong, or that might need to be adjusted, or the number of like low-level systems that might need to be recompiled in a certain way, and then because there's a real-time component, like there's also the problem of like if you've played games on emulators that are on too performant of a system. Oh, the frame timing's all off because now it's going twice as fast, and so all the characters are shuffled around, and it screwed up the game logic. Like there's just so much extra stuff that you would need to test. And now we're talking about a level of investment where it's like, well, we may as well go and do the whole thing. And so I really doubt that we're going to get a speed bump unless there's some sort of supply chain reason that forces their hand.
Right, yeah. As far as Apple Intelligence features, what in the visionOS environment would be most useful and helpful? Like, is it the text manipulation or the Siri where you can ask it to, work across your system in cool ways?
That's a good question. I think, honestly, if you really zoom out, the Vision Pro lends itself to that sort of futuristic Minority Report or Star Trek. I'm conversing with my computer as a whole bunch of stuff comes up, like because I can tell Apple Intelligence right with my phone, hey, go and get information from messages, and then think about how far things are going to drive and be using maps. And it's not showing you all that. It's just kind of collating your semantic index, quote unquote, with the apps and the intents that are available to it. And then it's burping out an answer, which is great and very impressive. But if I was in a Vision Pro headset, I could ask it stuff like that and have it show its work for me, maybe in a series of windows up above. And I can see all that stuff happen in flight, and then it becomes almost like a workflow or a pipeline where I can. And Apple, even in their WWDC keynote, they kind of showed some of these workflows translated into shortcut iconography, almost like you'll be able to go in later and tweak them. And that gave me the idea of like, man, it would be really cool if you just saw that get built in part of your physical space as Siri is working through and churning through the problem, because then if you spot anything, I was like, oh yeah, it thought this about that.
Yeah.
But actually, when it saw that message about that restaurant, it was actually this. I've got 2 Gyukakus in Orlando, and I'm talking about the one in Dr. Phillips, not the one in Flamingo Crossing. And I could just like tweak it at the point of failure and then let it, recreate the rest of the pipeline. And so now we're getting into the space where for complex workflows or stuff like that with the assistant that requires multiple sources of data, your ability to see everything around you and not be just trapped to one little tiny rectangle that's got, size points that they can't necessarily all program for because different sizes of phones and iPads and whatnot. I think that the UI side is going to be way more expansive on an ideal version of the Vision Pro with Apple Intelligence.
Yeah, that could be pretty nifty if they could. Yeah, if they can get it there first off, and then the UI could be fun. It could be interesting and more powerful than other platforms, just because of the inherent nature of endless space.
If we, I guess the other thing that comes to mind is if we talk about AI and more advanced, whether it's NLPs or just more advanced models that leverage the neural processor. I'm getting all my
the NPU, right? Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah. I said NLP like a natural language. Anyway, so yeah, if you got the NPU and you've got a smart model, then maybe that's what would enable a software feature like the keyboard that you tap on the desk that's holographically put in front of you,
Yeah.
right? Maybe that's the thing that unlocks the sign language like Scribble, or maybe it just makes the keyboard fast enough. Or maybe, something that I would love with the product is slightly faster recognition of what I'm looking at and correction for misclicks when like I click on a thing and then there's some lag and I look at another thing and it actually clicks to the second thing that I looked at, which for me happens all the time.
Yeah, what's actually about the big thing is I'm typing and then I'm trying to look at what I just typed and I end up screwing something up in the process of looking between both the typing and the keyboard.
Yeah. Since getting Vision Pro, I've learned that apparently I'm a darting eyes kind of person.
Yeah.
So I'll look at something and then the instant that I click a thing, I'm onto the next thing. Or even before I've clicked a thing, I'm onto the next thing. And with Vision Pro, you have to move at a more deliberate pace for it to capture your input correctly.
Yeah. And I guess for now, the Mac will be even more valuable with my M1 MacBook Air will run the Apple Intelligence stuff, thankfully.
Right, which again, to the point of like, it just reinforces us to be using the Mac more and more and more, and this thing just becomes a kind of a glorified dummy terminal. And there was another report out this morning of Gurman saying that the cheaper version of the Vision Pro might actually be literally that.
Tethered.
Require a tethered connection.
To like an iPad, iPhone, or Mac. Yeah, it'd be interesting if they do the tethering to like an iPad or iPhone. Like, do you have universal visionOS apps at that point? And do you need what the UI is? Like, do you have the full visionOS and it's storage? Like, the media's, the like movies you download for visionOS are a higher bit rate than the ones on the iPhone because it would look like crap at lower bit rates. So, like,
I think what you're hearing there is it would probably be like CarPlay but strapped to your face, where you have of course it wouldn't look like that, but it would be a reprojection technology, right? Where like the iPhone would be rendering everything and pushing it up in this imaginary world where you've got really hyper fast Wi-Fi back and forth between the phone and the Vision Pro, or the Vision non-Pro, I suppose. It would create a lot of problems like that, but from my perspective, I think that probably the best analogy would be what Stage Manager feels like on an external display.
Yeah.
Right? So if you got an iPad and you plug it into external display and you're using Stage Manager, you're like suddenly like its bigness is what stands out. You're like, this feels like a real computer. But then you go to do anything and you're like, nah, this is still an iPad. Right? I suspect it would probably be a similar experience to that, where it's like a little bit more on rails and a little bit more constrained. But allow people the freedom of not having to stare hunched over their phone so much.
Right, yeah. On your Mac, have you tweaked anything about it since getting Vision Pro to make it more friendly to use there? Like any different utilities, or is it the same experience that you've used prior?
That's a fantastic question. I guess the fact that I'd never even thought of that is a testament to how good the Mac Virtual Display is. I had to do a dozen different things to get the resolution looking okay on the Xreal 1080p non-Retina glasses. But really, I mean, that screen sharing, just whoever worked on that, whether it was a team or, it strikes me as something that like a small team who was responsible for this sort of thing, like just did on a lark, and then they demoed it, and then it went really well, and they got the time to build it out, and whoever did that, kudos to them, because from engineering on up to user experience, it's just so pleasant. It's way better than I expected it would be.
Yeah, no, it works really well, and the copy and paste between the two platforms works as expected as well, and yeah, it's a brilliant feature. I was just looking at AirPlay in the Mac, and if you just go to audio AirPlay in the Mac, sadly Apple Vision Pro is not there. I think it's just there for the video and doing the full experience there. So that'd be cool.
Well, thanks for checking.
Yeah.
Saved me an afternoon of pain upgrading the.
Yeah, I don't know if there would be a third-party Mac app that like sees the Apple Vision Pro in the way I know there's like Airfoil and some other weird AirPlay apps for the Mac. I don't know. I got to play around with some of that stuff. As far as WWDC in general, any favorite announcements we have not chatted about, even if it's not visionOS related?
Yeah, there were several things that I thought. I'm a sucker for just like a good demo.
Yeah,
and there were a couple very good demos. I thought that the introduction. We're in the outdoor wearable section of the keynote. This is like the second or third time they've done this, where when we're talking about watches and AirPods, we're suddenly in the tall grass of Apple Park, exploring with junior executives we don't know, and one of them who was talking about AirPods and the new gestures with the shaking your head up and down or left and right for yes and no. If that's all that they had done, it would have come and went, and I would have forgotten about it. Meaning, like, if you have AirPods Pro (parentheses second generation right parentheses), if you have those and Siri, you have Siri announcements turned on because you haven't been infuriated by that yet, and so you haven't turned it off. If all those conditions are true, and it asks you a yes/no question, so I guess that's 3 conditions, you can nod or shake your head, and instead of verbally responding. If that's all that he'd done was just say that and then do his own little head shake, I would have forgotten about it and no one would have noticed. But then they cut away to a shot in an elevator of a dude surrounded by like 8 other people and crowded space. And he's doing this when he gets a call from Graham or whatever. And he shakes his head no. And that whole cutaway was like 4.5 seconds long, right? Like, I'm sure trimmed to time. I'm sure they spent a whole day filming just this one thing. Its brevity provided like a comedic timing that is often absent from Apple keynotes. The fact it was so short, I thought was funny. And so it was, that demo was great. That landed really well. And I'm excited to use it personally as somebody, because I run with just my watch and my AirPods. I'm excited to be able to do that. The other one that stands out is, of course, everyone's talking about the math notes, where you're on an iPad and you can draw a free body diagram with whatever physics, and then you adjust these variables and you write big complicated equations and it'll solve your math for you, which I think is almost no one will ever use, right? Like probably the reason they made the calculator app for iPad was to show off that they could do this, primarily for the demo, right? Because it could have just lived in the Notes app.
If I was in high school, this would be so much fun to have, like, having a math class to go to and using this.
Oh, totally. Right. And so it demoed really, really well. It was funny. It was lighthearted. And it shows off, even if no one really uses it, or even if in practice, when you try to use it, it's kind of not worth using, maybe, because the number of devices you would need to have. Anyway, even if no one really uses it, I think as a demo and as a moment in time, it was a great way to educate the community. Here is a use case for AI that you've never thought of. Here is a very snappy, very practical, very I think Apple at its best is taking very familiar user interface components, things like the pencil at this point, and notes, and drawing stuff on and sketching notes. Take familiar stuff and then just make it magic. So I thought that, Steve Jobs is smiling down somewhere, because that's the kind of demo that he probably would have loved to give.
Oh, he would have loved that, yeah. We were talking earlier about input on the Vision Pro, and something I experienced in OmniFocus is this continuity thing where you can say scan a document with a nearby device, and when you do that, it'll open up your iPad or iPhone to take a photo and scan that, and does that all from a locked device, and that works in Vision Pro. Something I was thinking of, maybe they should add a continuity with iPad in Apple Pencil, where how on iPad you can just start writing on the lock screen and it takes a note or whatever. Maybe there's use your iPad with Apple Pencil to do input, or maybe use your iPad as a big glass virtual keyboard to work with in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to see them. You can use an iPad and an Apple Pencil in Sidecar currently. I think there is probably an opportunity for, if you're using Vision Pro and you're holding an Apple Pencil, the fact that it is so long and just thick enough and pointed, an imagined Apple Pencil could actually also maybe have other markers on it.
Yes.
That make it really, really easy to accurately pinpoint its orientation, its role, and so forth visually to the Vision Pro cameras. So being able to just write on a table without the iPad involved at all, or being able to use it as like you would a mouse, right, and control the pointer as well as use it as an input device. I think you're right. I think that could be really impressive, really, really powerful. In fact, like any number at that point, like especially if these are quote unquote dumb devices that are just like look a certain way or maybe are tagged in a certain way, you could have a whole cadre of different equipment that would just be a digital twin sort of like what the real tool would do for different kinds of environments. And that's probably something that Apple won't explore, but maybe somebody using like enterprise APIs will try in the field for modeling or simulating.
Yeah, your big hope with visionOS 2 was an API that will allow developers to use the cameras to interact with text in the book you're reading. Or so we got this sorta. Enterprise apps can now do this and read QR codes as another version of this API. How are you feeling about this? Have you looked in this API? How are you feeling with the one they gave us? And do you have any hopes towards them, maybe testing this out this year and then next year they bring this out to consumers as they figure this out?
Yeah, so if you're whether you're a developer or not, if you're listening and you aren't sure what the draw here is, in the interest of privacy, Apple has basically blinded all third-party apps from seeing anything about the world that you're in. Everyone just exists sort of in a black vacuous space. And all you get to know is very basic stuff like you can use limited, like a subset of the Vision APIs to look at like identify where is a plane, meaning like a wall or a floor. And you can, certain known objects you can identify that is as an example, like an apple or something. That was another one of the new enterprise APIs that you can have like, custom object identification. But if you want to know like what's the, is the person walking through a train station? You can't know that. You can't like, are they looking at a sign? Is there a sign in front of them? Is there text on the sign? You can't know that. You can know these things with ARKit today on an iPhone, right? You're holding an iPhone up and you've got a custom app. My brother, he works at cars.com, and he was playing with ARKit last year, just like, hey, I can look at a car and identify what kind of car it is.
Yeah.
Right? This is all just R&D, like just kind of playing around. Its ability to identify objects is really impressive, and of course, the reason it's pretty impressive is because they knew that they were going to be building this product, right? But I think somewhere along the way, the privacy implications, maybe similar to how the AirTags spent so much more time in the oven than they otherwise would have, because people realized that the risk that they be abused to stalk people was so high that they had to be rethought. I suspect that Apple just went, pedal to the metal on a whole bunch of really cool ARKit stuff that works great on the phone. The phone is like, oh, look, that's a book. Hey, I'll read every page of that book for you, right? And I'll slurp up all that text. I could write that app, but I can't do that on the Vision Pro, even though that's the camera that's on your face, even though you could do it totally passively while, say, holding the book instead of trying to awkwardly hold a phone over a book. And the reason I can't is because what if Facebook or TikTok or some, seedy application would just suck up all of your surroundings and use that to market at you or sell your data, right? Or invade your privacy somehow. I get it. I get why Apple wouldn't be comfortable with having something as basic as just like a prompt for like allow while in app, or dismiss, don't allow, like something that could be powered through during an onboarding experience for something so dramatic as can literally see everything in your room, can see that you're on the toilet, right, while you're using the app or whatever the case is.
Yep. Can see like, a naked person walks the room and they see that, whatever.
Yep. And if they're, a unscrupulous, app developer, and they're uploading it all, then it becomes this whole gigantic vector for, I get it. It's bad. Like what could be done with this is indeed very bad, but I don't think it's not solvable. So Tim, you shared with me this, dub session about enterprise licenses, and it does have a pass-through video, entitlement that only enterprises can get and only for internally shared apps. And it provides a pass-through like feed that is very similar to the ARKit one. There are some other considerations just because like the formatting of that feed is a little bit different. But fundamentally, I don't see how Apple goes from this to something that they would ever put out in front of the public unless it was an entitlement that you had to apply for, and then you maybe had to put maybe you have to upload the source code, right? They would
like the CarPlay people have to go through a lot of things.
Exactly, like the CarPlay people, because they got to certify we're not going to just have like a YouTube or something like playing videos and because that's against the law in a lot of states. I think Apple would set the bar just high enough that companies like Facebook would never consider jumping through that hoop, like share all your source code, for example. And if they set the bar there, I would do it. What I think is more likely, and what I really hope to see, is you could imagine, you're talking about how, like having the first curved window in the interface with the new Mac virtual display. You could imagine another new construct in the operating system that's sort of like imagine you're resizing a rectangle and it's purple and it's glowing. It's kind of got some like neon look, and it's almost like you're creating a portal, right? And this portal can be owned by an app. It can be an app window. And what you're doing is you are giving express consent that the app can see anything through that portal window. And it's like a hot fire neon sort of thing. So it's like when it's on, like it's like your screen recording, right? Like it's like got a thing on it. Now I'm drag dropping that, open it up, and I'm dragging it over position so that's in front of my book, and I'm reading my book. And that means like what I've communicated to the system through my pinchy pinches is it is okay for Justin's translation app to watch me read this book. Maybe there are other limitations, or maybe there's other things that I can do to kind of preserve my privacy. But when I like close the app, that goes away. Or when I move, maybe if I move a certain amount, that like disappears and I have to reauthorize, just make sure I don't, see the naked person walking by.
Yeah, and it can remember, visionOS remembers where you leave them. So like if you look up,
right,
that window is still where you left it. It's not like following you around with your eyes,
Precisely. Yeah. So I think this is solvable. They probably wanted to err on the side of caution initially, but my hope is, and honestly, to be totally frank, I'm a little bit heartened by how slow the uptake has been on native Vision Pro apps. And I think part of the reason it's been slow for developers is because like it's unclear what you would do here that you couldn't just do on an iPad, right? From a functionality perspective, it just doesn't provide APIs to get at any of this good stuff. The always on microphone, right? Like I want to be able to leverage that to like listen to conversations so that when I say to the computer, hey, like what did that person just say? Or like, oh, I translate that last little bit for me because I fell off. Like, like the pass-through video, all of these sensors could tell all kinds of apps so many interesting things, and they're currently inaccessible for privacy concerns. I think that clever design could provide a way for Apple to have its cake and eat it too, where developers can get the expressiveness that they need to really fully leverage the platform while still, stiff arming the creepy ad tech, stalkery kind of companies.
Yeah, and maybe they also could open up object recognition for certain things where it's like document scanning apps can now exist because we're just going to recognize papers and that's it,
Right. And that's a hope. That's like that's the other avenue this could take is like, a paper with text on it. We will read the text for you, right, and tell you what language we think it is. And maybe that's an input, so I can't see necessarily when or why or what happened or what I'm looking at. I just get a kind of a feed of text that has been seen. But even that, short of having some sort of magic portal, it would probably report back a lot of other stuff that people wouldn't necessarily want to bleed into their environment. Yeah,
that's true. There's can be a lot of the extraneous, Post-it notes or something around. And
right, exactly. The Post-it notes with all the passwords.
Yes, exactly.
Right, that's not...
Yeah. Are there any other APIs you hope would exist one day, or is the camera the big one for you?
The camera's the big one because I'm so focused on like how this could be such a tremendous language learning tool. I suspect it will be very difficult for them to ever get real games that are more than like a 5-minute novelty without a controller, without something tactile. I joked when Vision Pro was announced that I'm going to have to buy like $3 castanets on Amazon because I hate the feel of my index finger and my thumb having to pinch together to make a computer happy. I despise it. It just feels icky to me. I don't know. I'm a very sensitive person. I have not yet bought the castanets, but maybe I will today. I'll write that down. But similarly, if I'm playing a game and I'm pulling a trigger or I'm pushing a button or I'm engaging in some sort of tactile activity, first of all, like there's never going to be any sort of force feedback where you can feel it on your bare hands, right?
Yeah, the haptics are huge. Like PS2, I want those sense controllers in Apple because you have the resistance and the triggers, which is great, and you also have just the haptics,
and the ability
hit a
to
button for different things. Yeah,
not just the haptics, but just knowing, like feeling a physical button and like that you're actually pulling it. There's something like that can feel cool and badass, but like no one feels badass making a little finger gun and pulling it back, right? So Apple, I know they don't want to make their own controller. They haven't on any of their other platforms, right? They've always worked with partners.
They should, though, for Vision Pro. Like, it'd be so good if they did a first-class, like, VR controller.
And this is where, in my opinion, like, I think that, like, Valve is one of the few companies that doesn't have either a huge beef with Apple already, or doesn't have a competing platform that puts them at odds in terms of their interests very often. And if anything, Valve has its own VR with Steam VR, but also like, the Valve Index and stuff. It's unclear whether or not Valve is interested in the rigmarole of R&D and production and retail of another VR headset when it's such a small audience. It just seems like a natural fit to partner with Valve. Hey, Valve, make some awesome controllers. In exchange, we will do first-class Steam Link to Steam VR if you've got a PC in the area, right? Or if you can do it over remotely, and just as long as you don't expose the store, great. I think that Valve would take that deal. Again, this is like you said with Apple Intelligence, it's all about prioritization, and this is now Apple's probably smallest platform, and they're not thinking about what's 2 years from now. Or what's going to make Tim and Justin happy. They already know what the end game is and what they want this thing to look like in 7 years. And so it's possible that like any experience that requires a light shield, they just don't even want to consider that because they think that long term they just want to be selling spectacles, right?
Yeah, and that'll be a shame. I think it'll eventually diverge. You have the fully immersive stuff as well as the spectacles because creating a movie theater environment is phenomenal, and you can't do that with spectacles. Yeah.
I agree, and I think they're learning that too because they're leaning into like the entertainment as one of the handful of things that they can do well on the platform right now. So I suspect like 2 years ago, they were probably thinking spectacles only. That's the end game. Anything we have to do for Vision Pro that's like actually VR, but we want to sell it as AR. More and more, I think that the further that they go down this road, the more that they are going to be hitching their wagon to at least a mode or like an attachment long term that will shut the world out for the same reason. Because Apple is very careful when they upgrade something or they move forward that they never take something away if that thing is core to the experience.
For sure. And yeah, Sony would be another interesting partner because they've partnered with the DualSense and having full support of that. The PSVR 2 is struggling, I've heard, which is sad because I love mine. But I think Sony would love to sell more of those Sense controllers. Like that's a profit setter if they could those controllers are great. Apple aesthetics even.
So Sony has we're not seeing it now because their AAA PS5 games are selling decently well. But when you look at the profit margins on those games, Spider-Man 2 cost $300 million to make. That means it would have to sell more than 10 million copies to make a meaningful profit compared to a cheaper game that was popular. Microsoft is, a couple years down the road of the same sort of show, and we're all seeing how they're going to have to. They've decided they have to go multi-platform. How much more they're going to have to emphasize the PC. Microsoft has the PC as a hedge because they're the Windows company, and Sony has now announced in the last 6 months they're going to start releasing more and more stuff to the PC platform, but they don't have a storefront that anyone's really going to use. So those margins aren't going to be as good. What they really could consider is, to your point, partnering with Apple. So it's like, sure, if you're an Xbox person, you've got the PC as sort of your broader sphere of influence in terms of like, catching a broader range of audience. I think that there would be a tremendous opportunity for them to partner with Apple and then like be the preferred, other platform for their games. Apple would win because they'd get more games to their platform, and Sony would win because it would be a blue ocean of very few competitors.
Yeah, it's very weird seeing Death Stranding with the PlayStation kind of logo stuff come up when you launch that game on iPad. And then there's that kart racer game that just came out for the Vision Pro. And so they use hand tracking as if you're turning a wheel. I'm kind of tempted to dig out my Wii wheel, just have something to hold,
Yeah. I hear you.
As far as visionOS 2, anything else that you're kind of excited about that we haven't chatted about?
If my wife still had her Vision Pro,
she returned it. Okay,
because she just didn't.
Yeah, I was going to ask in the Tokyo trip if she went with you, and if that'd be a great spatial persona game night if she was still back at home.
Yeah, no, she returned it ultimately because I think that a combination of eyes and head shape and what she'd be using it for, like nothing about it clicked for her, and she gave it the old college try. Maybe a subsequent version will fit for her, but if I had a family member I was close to, like the spatial persona photo experience looks really cool, right? Like to look at photos with each other. That's a visionOS 2 thing. Jog my memory. I'm trying to think of what else I'd even be. It was slim pickings.
You can use your mouse now. I mean,
that's true. That was a weird.
It really was.
That really made me wonder. It made me wonder whether or not Apple was sending a signal that they like really just want to drop mouse support generally, like whether or not like.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that too. The gestures are very nice for to look up all the time anymore to get the control center. That's a nice little.
Yes, that was the other big one for sure. I think that the current roll your eyes to the back of your head gesture is a weird for getting to control center, and having it available from putting down your wrist sounds much more natural.
Yeah, and if you used more visionOS apps, the Apple organization thing is actually kind of cool.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm sure. Yeah, I can't believe. Is that they didn't really talk about this, but is that drag drop and also making folders similar to iOS?
No folders. You can remove iPad apps from that one folder and move them around, and they have a slightly different app icon because of that. But it is you're dragging apps around, and I spent like an hour to get my perfect 3. I have like 3 or 4 home screens at the very beginning. Now I've got my first page is all my like entertainment apps, along with Call Sheet, and I've got music and Pocket Cast there as well. But yeah, all my video streamers, and kind of page 2 is my entertainment or my productivity page with like all the messages and Ferrite and all my agenda and all my different productivity stuff. And so I've now like groupings of like pages which all make sense to me, and I'm actually using some apps I wasn't before because I kind of forgot I had them installed, kind of thing. So it's nice to have them front of mind again.
So, but there's no app library, so you can't remove something from the home display.
No, They need the app library. Of all the platforms, it's baffling that they didn't do the app library here. Like,
so how many pages then? You must have.
Let me count. This is real briefly here.
No wonder it would take an hour. That's a lot of.
I think I have around 12 pages. I believe.
Whew. You're gonna find out before too long that there's a limit.
That's the thing, right?
That Apple didn't anticipate people having more than 15 or something, and you're gonna have the weirdest support call ever.
I know. Yeah. To be fair, it is pretty good about dragging up an app from page 12 to page 1. That's not as bad as you might think. And I haven't had any situations where the home screen just, crashes and forgets everything, which, if you remember in the early days of iOS when they added reorganization,
sure do. That
was a mess and it would screw things up all the time. So that's been solid so far.
Right on. Yeah. Let's see. So you covered the photos, the gestures, the reorganizing the home screen.
Your keyboard you can view in environments, but you don't use a shield, so that's less of a thing for you, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's true. I tend not to use the shield, but when you're in an immersive environment, the fact that the keyboard didn't poke through before was frustrating. And in fact, that was one of the things that made me excited about taking the shield off. It's so weird too. If you're, even if you're a touch typist, right? Like I am, like we just have to look
keyboard
at like,
shortcuts
where
too.
our hands are. Yeah, where are our hands relative to the keyboard? Oh, the keyboard like is shifted to the left a little bit. I need to kind of scooch it over. So having that punch through, I think, would be great. I guess you get a couple more environments.
Yeah, Bor is in there. It's very relaxing. So even with the air shield off or the light seal off, you will use environments and just be able to see around you as well.
Yeah, I like whenever the thing in front of me is an eyesore or is particularly distracting, I'm happy to crank up the environment. The only time, like and this has actually been in terms of using the Vision Pro, I wouldn't call it a disappointment per se, but just like an interesting complication. The time when I most want to use an immersive environment is when I'm surrounded by people I don't want to be dealing with, which is like I'm on a plane, right? But also like I'm also surrounded by strangers who could, they could tickle me or something, or the flight attendant might want to ask me about something. And like, while the demo that they gave last summer was very convincing of, oh, they'll break through and you'll just see them. In my experience, that has not been the case that I've like there. So I would love to be fully immersed when I'm in an airplane, but if like, there's going to be flight attendants or somebody else wants to get up and go to the bathroom or something, I just feel like such an ass if I'm like intentionally closing myself off to even hearing what they're saying. So I tend not to use it in that environment.
The breakthrough seems slightly better into, I don't know if that's my imagination, but it feels like it's working better for me as a thing.
Oh, that's good.
The other thing that I discovered in development mode, you can enable the Mac Virtual Display to work when you're inside a fully immersive app. So I can be inside, Sandwiches Theater app and have the Mac Virtual Display on the ceiling and, use messages while I'm watching something, which is kind of it's a nice little thing where you can bring your Mac into a fully immersive, mode and still use it, which is cool.
Nice. Yeah. It's cool to see them iterating. It's impossible. It's important to grade them on a curve because, of course, just getting this thing out the door in February was probably a Herculean effort on the software side. And so the fact that there's anything to show at all for this fall is impressive.
Yeah, for sure. So anything else we didn't cover they'd like to before we wrap it up?
These are just about all of my current Vision Pro thoughts. I think that my takeaway is, and I wrote this on my blog earlier today, that I think that Gruber's birdies telling him about, the potentiality for Vision Pro to not receive Apple Intelligence as a feature due to a hardware limitation, I think that's maybe the biggest news that we've had since the thing launched. Of course, it's not good news and it's a bummer, but it has me thinking more about what is the strategic direction that Apple has in mind, especially because some of these leaks are suggesting that they're kind of altering their plans a little bit. Like, I think that they're in this to win it. I think they know it's a 10-year project, but I'm really curious to hear from Apple next time they talk about Vision Pro to understand, to see if any of those strategy course adjustments are reflected in how they talk about Apple Vision Pro going forward. Similar to how like the way that they talked about the watch really changed in years 2 and 3.
And I was chatting with Adam Leesinger about this, but it seems like I trust them more about Apple Vision Pro than I do for, say, like the iPad. It seems like Mike Rockwell is focused only on visionOS and moving that platform forward, where the iPad feels more the leftovers from iOS, and it feels less thought out these days, as far as a central figure navigating this platform.
There was a moment, right, when like the iPad was the great hope that this was going to be the future of computing and it's going to kill the Mac. And that was the moment when iPad got the maximum amount of corporate attention and investment. And when that became clear, not like where things were going, now we're like, oh, the iPad's in this morass. Well, Apple, if they're going to have any sort of, like moat around the defense mechanism for the iPhone, the phone market kind of dissipating, right? They need to have an answer to what would be next. And this is the visionOS platform is the current, this is what would be next, right? So I think it makes a ton, like if I'm a senior executive at Apple, it makes a ton of sense to be continuing to plow strategic investments into this platform, even if it's not selling well today, until and unless we eventually arrive at the conclusion this isn't the future. And that could happen. But I don't think that we're anywhere near there yet.
Nope. Well, this has been an awesome chat. Thank you for your time today diving into all this. Where can folks listen to your podcast, read your blog, and all the multimedia stuff you're doing over there?
Yeah, so it's all aggregated at justin.searls.co, and if you go there and explore the sidebar and click around, you'll find a bunch of stuff. My podcast is titled Breaking Change, and so you can find that where all good podcasts are sold, I guess. It is on Spotify and Apple and Overcast and all that good stuff. And you're listening to a podcast now, so it's probably the most natural thing. Like, if you enjoy hearing me talk about stuff, it's a more explicit podcast, and I cover a broader range of topics than just Vision Pro. But it's like a tech forward Apple, some programming stuff, some gaming stuff, some movie stuff. But it's a longer form thing. It's kind of like drive time radio, where you got me for 2 or 3 hours, and you can just. If you're the kind of person who needs a voice in your head while you're walking the dog or doing chores or washing the dishes, and you'd like somebody to talk to you, it's that kind of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, so go check that out. I'm one of those people. I'm one of the people that get excited when I see, this podcast has only 3 hours, went 5 hours this week. It's like, yes, I yeah.
Yeah. When I first launched it, and some people were like, "Whoa, that's really long." I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, I've never listened to a podcast that was long enough."
Yeah, I love a good long podcast. So yeah, go check out Breaking Change.
Breaking Change, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Justin, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Right on, Tim. Thank you so much.
Well, that was an interview with Justin. My thanks again to Justin for his time recording. My thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. My thanks once again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of Vision Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com. Download Agenda today for free on all of your Apple devices. Early access to this podcast and iPad Pros is available via Apple Podcasts and over at Patreon. Subscribe today at visionpros.fm/Patreon. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.